Welcome back, class. We're going over Chapter 3, Section 2 of the textbook, and we'll be talking about the Constitution today. We went over the constitutional amendments 11 through 27 in class, but now we're going to focus on the Constitution as a whole, different views about how the Constitution should be amended, why it's been such a static document over hundreds of years, yet it's also a document that can be changed. So Jefferson felt that the Constitution should not be changed on a whim, but changed as society and circumstances changed. He believed that every generation is a distinct nation, meaning he didn't believe that future generations should be binded by previous generations. He famously said the earth belongs to the living and not the dead. Therefore, the Constitution should be revised every generation or so. Thomas Jefferson's counterpart, James Madison, had slightly different views. He felt that laws and constitutions grow in authority and acceptance the longer they go unchanged. And he was worried that changing the Constitution could split the country into factions, and factions might reinforce sectional rivalries and leave the nation prey to foreign powers and influence. He also feared that if the government had to be rebuilt every so often, there might be periods of chaos during that revision time. So although the Constitution was considered a product of its time, there have been very few changes over the last 220 plus years, which sort of testified to its enduring wisdom. It survived wars, assassinations, economic crises, and yet still been the world's oldest written constitution. In no means was the Constitution considered perfect. There were a number of injustices within it, permitting slavery and the slave trade. It also gave power to the states to qualify for voting, like women and non-whites and poor that were all denied the right to vote. And again, these decisions reflected societal views at the time. What makes the Constitution a living document is that it can be updated and relevant for each new generation. This is definitely a question that you will want to look for on a test. What makes the U.S. Constitution an enduring document? The amendment process is a relatively strict one, and it was done this way to prevent momentary passions or prejudices of the majority from violating the rights of the rest of the citizens. Article 5 of the Constitution describes the amendment process. It states that amendments have to first be proposed and then ratified. There are two different ways of proposing and two different ways of ratifying, meaning there are four different methods for amending the Constitution. By creating a two-step process that required ratification by the states, it restricted the power of Congress to change the Constitution and ensured that any change would reflect the national will, which is the key principle to popular sovereignty. Each step in the process requires a supermajority, which is a majority that is larger than a simple majority. In other words, anything over 50% is a majority, but a supermajority could consist of something like 2/3 or 3/4. And the whole purpose of this process being difficult is it weeds out frivolous amendments. There are two ways an amendment can be proposed: by Congress with approval of at least 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate, or by delegates at a national convention that is called by Congress at the request of at least 2/3 of the state legislatures. If that second way of proposing an amendment sounds a little strange, it's because it's never been done before. All amendments to the Constitution have been proposed by Congress. One of the main issues for why a national convention has hardly ever been reached is because Article 5 of the Constitution is a little bit vague, and whether or not it is limited to proposing only the amendment that it was considered to call or open it up to other amendments. Think of it like this: you go to a meeting and you're there to talk about one particular issue, and then a number of other issues get brought up. And that was sort of the problem. If one amendment was being proposed, and then they started talking about maybe other amendments or repealing amendments, how would that cloud the issue? And so because of that uncertainty, the National Convention has almost never been used. For ratifying an amendment, Congress sends the proposed amendment to the 50 states for ratification, and the states can ratify in one of two ways, but Congress gets to determine which way is used. The first way is that it's voted on by state legislatures. At least 3/4 of state legislatures must approve an amendment for it to be ratified. Or citizens can elect delegates to conventions called in each state specifically to consider the amendment. Passage requires approval by conventions in at least 3/4 of the states. Today we spent a lot of time on prohibition, the 18th Amendment, also known as the Volstead Act, and then the 21st Amendment, which eventually repealed the 18th Amendment. What you really want to know is, why was the 18th Amendment passed? What effects did it have on the country? And ultimately, why did it fail? And we talked about all three of those things in class. So this area of your notes can be limited because we spent so much time talking about prohibition today. But those are some areas you'll want to consider when we're talking about the test. Again, the 21st Amendment repealed or canceled the 18th Amendment. And what this highlights is the importance of the Constitution being difficult to be amended. To some degree, you could argue that the 18th Amendment was a frivolous amendment, that there were factions of people, particularly women's groups and religious groups, that led the charge for prohibition laws to pass, and it was not the will of the nation. To give you a better idea of just how difficult it is to change the Constitution, there have been more than 10,000 attempts of amendments that have been suggested or proposed. Only 33 of them have been passed by Congress and sent to the states for ratification. Of those 33, 27 have been adopted, 6 of which have been rejected. Please be sure to have an idea of the amendments that you would consider to be important that might be on a test. We obviously focused on a couple of them today in class, particularly the 18th and the 21st, but this is a nice chart that kind of breaks down all of them for you and can help you on the assignment if you haven't completed it yet. And you can pretty much bet you're going to have a question about amending the Constitution or knowing ways to amend the Constitution. So make sure that you're aware of that and prepared for the test. The process of adding to the Constitution began with the first 10 amendments, also known as the Bill of Rights, and since then 17 more amendments were added. They identify, support, and protect some of our most important rights. We did talk about the Bill of Rights a little bit in class, and so it's not necessary in terms of your assessment to know, how many were originally drafted or what the dates were, so long as you understand what they protected and what they meant. For example, the First Amendment. It was restrictive, declares what the federal government may not do. It extended individuals' basic rights, the right to practice religion freely, protects freedom of expression, and the right to ask the government to correct injustices. Some of the other important amendments in the Bill of Rights, the second is the right to bear arms. The Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable searches and seizures of private property. The Fifth and Sixth deal with due process of the law and the right to a speedy trial and a right to an attorney. The Seventh through 10th protect the rights or powers that belong to the states and to the people. The Third Amendment is an interesting one that we talked a little bit about in class, as maybe being probably the most irrelevant today, but at the same time it definitely demonstrates that the Constitution was a document of its time and needs to be adjusted as time goes on. A number of amendments are considered Civil War amendments, like granting African American citizenship, banning slavery, granting African American men the right to vote. There were some social reforms like prohibition, and some changes such as the popular election of senators and women's right to vote, which strengthened democracy. And ultimately, what the Constitution provides is a stable yet flexible government.